Good afternoon. It's Sunday, January 18th. I'm Ari O'Sullivan, and this is IBA News broadcasting from Jerusalem. ISIS in Israel. It was cleared for publication today that the Shin Bet Security Service has arrested 7 Galilee Arabs for setting up an Islamic State branch in Israel. According to security officials, the suspects have confessed that over the last year they formed a group dedicated to global jihad that they called Salafia Jihada. Officials say that the group purchased weapons in order to commit terror attacks and planned to target security officials. The group leader was identified as 40-year-old attorney Adnan Jamil Saeed Al-Adin from Nazareth. Activities of the group include preparations to join ISIS in Syria, lessons in making Molotov cocktails, and animal slaughter as preparations for killing infidels. In Ramallah, the motorcade of visiting Canadian Foreign Minister John Baird was struck by eggs as he was leaving the meeting with his Palestinian counterpart Riyad al-Maliki. Palestinian youth protested angrily at the Baird visit that came at the start of his official trip to the region. Canada is one of Israel's most steadfast allies and was one of the countries that opposed the Palestinian bid to receive recognition of statehood at the United Nations. Protesters held signs reading, "Baird, you are not welcome in Palestine." The Canadian Foreign Minister described his meeting with Maliki as cordial and constructive and said there were candid and frank exchanges in areas where there is a difference of opinion. Israel has blasted a decision by the International Criminal Court to probe suspected war crimes carried out by Israel during last summer's Operation Protective Edge. IBA's Margaret Dutkevich reports.
Jerusalem blasted the International Criminal Court's decision to launch a preliminary inquiry into possible war crimes carried out by Israel in Palestinian territories.
Israel rejects the absurd decision of the ICC prosecutor. It's absurd for the ICC to ignore international law and agreements under which the Palestinians don't have a state and can only get one through direct negotiations with Israel. The rules of the ICC are clear. No state, no standing, no case. And here's the ultimate folly of this decision. It's a democracy of Israel, a world leader in fighting terrorism, which is to be hauled to the dock in The Hague, while the terrorist war criminals of Hamas are the ones who are going to be pressing the charges. I won't be surprised if ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and Hezbollah follow suit.
Foreign Minister Victor Lieberman told Israel Radio this morning that Israel is lobbying member states of the ICC to cut funds to the court. The ICC is a political body, said Lieberman, adding that a number of leaders he has spoken to believe there's no justification for the court's existence. Court prosecutors said the probe would scrutinize full independence and impartiality of crimes committed since June 13th last year, the period of last summer's Operation Protective Edge between Israel and Hamas. Last month, after failing to win statehood recognition at the UN Security Council, Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas requested membership at the ICC, despite strong opposition from Israel and the US. In a somewhat mumbled response, the US State Department said the Palestinians have not met the necessary requirements to be accepted as members by the ICC.
I haven't seen those particular statements by Israeli officials, so I'm not going to say anything one way or another about them. Again, this is an announcement that has just taken place. We're looking at it. Our view is on the broader question of the ICC. We don't think the Palestinians have met the necessary requirements to be a part of it.
The Palestinians welcomed the court's decision to launch a probe, saying Israel will finally be held accountable for its moves.
We believe this is a very important step, however modest, because for the first time in its history, since its creation, Israel is going to be subject to accountability, especially to legal and judicial accountability in terms of its own persistent violations of Palestinian rights and international law.
Not surprisingly, Hamas lauded the decision. Hamas spokesman in Gaza, Fawzi Barhoum, said they're ready to provide the court with thousands of documents backing up their claims that Israel perpetrated war crimes. Whatever the outcome of the court inquiry, the Palestinian move is likely to distance even further any chances of negotiating a peace deal with Israel. Margo Dudkevich, IBA News.
And our reporter adds that an unnamed senior Palestinian official said today that if Israel agrees to renew the transfer of tax revenues to the Palestinian Authority and stops new building in the West Bank settlements, the Palestinians will drop their suit and halt their application to become a member of the ICC. Well, being accepted as members of the International Criminal Court could boomerang against the Palestinians. That's the word from Middle East analyst Avi Sakharov, who spoke to IBA's Margo Dudkevich.
They will be accepted as members in the ICC, and I think that Ban Ki-moon himself said it at the beginning of April 1st. They will become members of the ICC. But this is very problematic for the PA because in a way, it puts them in danger from the fear of Israelis that will sue them in this court. I mean, all the time that you're not members of a court like this, like ICC, meaning you cannot be sued. But the minute that you join there, meaning that you are open to all kinds of charges against you from the Israeli side. So it's kind of a very delicate situation here for the Palestinians.
Okay, now last year Hamas and the Palestinian Authority signed a unity agreement, yet both sides seem to be operating independently for different goals. What's your take on the whole situation?
I think that the right word to describe this situation will be, in Arabic, kalam fadi, meaning everything is only talking and talking and talking. And now it's even not about talking, because it's pretty obvious, no more reconciliation, nothing like that. Fatah is in the West Bank, Gaza is again in Hamas is in Gaza's hands. Hamas controls Gaza, and nothing is going to be changed. I just published today, a couple of hours ago, an article saying that Hamas is operating secret cells, not all of Hamas, but one official from Hamas, Fatih Hamad. He's operating secret cells against Fatah, using violence, using explosives in order to undermine the reconciliation between Hamas and Fatah. There's a very strong and dominant group inside Hamas that is against any kind of reconciliation with Fatah, versus another group that is saying, look, after what we've gone through in Gaza, with the war, with Egypt, with the fall of the Muslim Brotherhood, we need to reconsider our policy. We need to reconcile with the PA and with the Egyptians.
And tell me, what about Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas's position in the Palestinian street? I mean, there's been a lot of criticism against him. How is the situation now?
Abbas's situation is not good. It's not at its peak, especially in the West Bank, by the way. It is much better in Gaza Strip. In the West Bank, many people do not like what the Palestinian Authority is not doing, meaning there's no changes on the ground, there's no outcome for the efforts, for the diplomatic efforts, and this is why they criticize Abbas for being too dovish. They want him to become more hawkish, and these voices are being heard also from inside Fatah and the PLO.
Who would be an option if Abbas was to step down?
That's a very tricky question, because I think that the alternative that we all know of is in jail, meaning Marwan Barghouti. He's the #1 Palestinian figure, the most popular one, but he's in the Israeli jail and is probably going to stay there. Now, I don't know what will happen if the Palestinians will decide to go to elections and to vote for Marwan Barghouti. That will put Israel under huge pressure to release Marwan Barghouti. Other than Marwan Barghouti, we have a couple of very known names that we all know of for decades. One of them is Jibril Rajoub, that might become the #2 in Fatah in the next coming elections for Fatah Central Committee. And, of course, there's the external threat for Mahmoud Abbas, which is not the State of Israel, it's Mohammed Dahlan. For Abbas, I think if you compare Israel, Hamas, I think the biggest danger for him, the way that he sees it, of course, is Mohammed Dahlan.
A freight train derailed near the Binyamin railway station this morning, causing major disruptions throughout the country on what is the busiest day of the week for train travel. As a result, there was heavy traffic on Israel's coastal road as commuters sought alternative means of transportation to overcome the delays. Israel Railway technical crews were dispatched to the scene and managed to place the wheels back on the track. Israel Railway officials say the train operations is gradually returning to its normal schedule. Arab local authorities across the country went on strike today to protest the shooting death of a 21-year-old resident of the Bedouin town of Rahat. The victim was shot dead near his home during a police raid on a suspected drug hideout. The Arab sector declared the strike following claims by the family that the deceased was not connected to the drug search. Police officials said that they were attacked by a group of locals while attempting to carry out an arrest. The police detectives said that they fired into the air to defend themselves. And the police have launched an investigation into the case, as well as the Justice Ministry. Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe has arrived in Israel for the first visit to Israel by the leader of Japan since 2006. It's part of a regional visit that included stops in Egypt, Jordan, Lebanon, and the Palestinian Authority. During his visit to Egypt, Abe pledged $200 million in non-military assistance to countries battling Islamic State. Abe said that the stability of the Middle East is the foundation for peace and prosperity in the world, and if we leave terrorism or weapons of mass destruction to spread in this region, the damage to the international community would be immeasurable. Japan also pledged $360 million to Egypt for projects including a new airport and power grid. Regarding Israeli-Palestinian affairs, Abe appealed to both sides to resume negotiations to advance the two-state solution. Abe is accompanied by more than 100 government officials and businessmen looking for opportunities in Israel. Several weeks ago, the Israeli cabinet approved a plan to strengthen economic ties with Japan. Prime Minister Ehud Olmert visited Japan in 2008, and Prime Minister Netanyahu was there last May. Turning now to the political and election news, and the cabinet has approved increasing the minimum wage. On the election front, there's quite a hullabaloo over the Likud campaign commercial that uses children to make fun of cabinet ministers. Here with all the news is IBA's political correspondent, Eli Wogelenter.
We'll start today with the cabinet, and the government approved a bill this morning to increase the minimum wage from 4,300 shekels per month to 5,000 shekels per month in 3 installments starting on April 1st. The measure, which will be brought to the Knesset on Wednesday, was agreed to by all Knesset factions and given special approval by Attorney General Yehuda Weinstein, who ruled that such legislation could be enacted during an election campaign. On to politics, and there's a campaign video creating quite a fuss today. A Likud video was posted on YouTube yesterday showing Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu surrounded by his political rivals, portrayed by children in a kindergarten, wreaking havoc on the room. Netanyahu plays the role of responsible adult, telling little Avigdor Lieberman that he must learn how to share with the other children, that little Yair Lapid should stop shaking his abacus counting toy because he will break it, that little Lapid and little Naftali Bennett should stop fighting over a chair during a game of musical chairs, and that a hyperactive little Tzipi Livni should stop running from one place to another. The video quickly came under fire for possibly violating campaign regulations barring parties from using children under the age of 15 for election propaganda. However, the law does not specifically mention online videos as election propaganda, and it is unclear whether the law applies to them. Likud said in a statement that unfortunately, because of a technical error, the video reached the internet even though it wasn't approved for publication or broadcast. The video broke what Bennett said was a non-aggression pact between them, which the Prime Minister has denied exists. Bennett accused Netanyahu of mismanaging the war against Hamas in Gaza over the summer, saying at least this child won't let missiles fly over Ben Gurion Airport. And his Bayit Yehudi party immediately released a video, which it must have prepared in advance, that shows a theoretical vote on Palestinian statehood in the style of the November 29, 1947 vote on Israeli independence. Listen up.
Meretz, yes. Yesh Atid, yes. Avoda, yes. Shas, yes. Israel Betenu, yes. Likud, yes. Habayit Yehudi, no, no, no.
Turning to Yesh Atid, and a new name has joined the party. MK Elazar Stern, who quit Tzipi Livni's Hatanoa last month, announced today that he will join Yair Lapid's Yesh Atid party for the Knesset election in March. Lapid said he saw Stern, who focused on issues of religion and state in the last Knesset, as the 20th Yesh Atid MK in the 19th Knesset. An observant Jew and a former IDF general, Stern said he agreed with Yesh Atid's party line on allowing public transportation on Shabbat. It is unclear yet what spot Stern will be allocated on Yesh Atid's list for the next Knesset. Lapid said he will reveal his Knesset list a week from tomorrow. Finally, another MK from Yisrael Beitenu has dropped out of the party. Agriculture Minister Yair Shamir, the party's number 2, and the son of former Prime Minister Yitzhak Shamir, became the latest senior Yisrael Beitenu MK to quit amid a massive corruption scandal implicating party officials, although he is not on the list of members being investigated. Shamir said he was stepping down because of party leader Avigdor Lieberman's new foreign policy platform ahead of the elections, which envisions a land and population swap with the Palestinians in a future peace agreement. MK Orly Levy Abaxis, daughter of former Foreign Minister David Levy, will now be put in second place on the Yisrael Beitenu list. Yisrael Beitenu's Central Committee will vote tomorrow to approve the party's list as chosen by its selection committee under the influence of party chairman Lieberman. Aryeh?
Thanks, our report, Eli. In Tunisia, hundreds of mourners gathered at the Great Synagogue of Tunis in memory of 21-year-old Yoav Hattab, who was among those killed in the attack on the kosher supermarket in Paris. The Jewish Tunisian-born victim was planning to make Israel his home, and he was buried in Jerusalem last week. The son of the chief Tunisian rabbi Benjamin Hattab was mourned by Jews and non-Jews alike. He cared deeply about his native country, and before his death, he posted a photo proudly holding up a blue-inked finger as proof that he voted in Tunisia's recent democratic elections, the country's first following the 2011 revolution. Tunisian Prime Minister Mehdi Joma was amongst the world leaders who participated in the Paris March against terrorism last week. Despite the public outpouring of grief over Hattab's murder, there are very few public statements for solidarity for the Jewish victims of the attack. Belgium has deployed hundreds of troops to guard potential targets of terrorism, including Jewish sites and diplomatic missions, following a series of raids and arrests on Islamic terror cells. Some 300 soldiers were stationed at locations such as the U.S. and Israeli embassies and at NATO and European institutions in the Belgian capital. It was an unusual step for the Belgians to use military for local policing, but officials explain that the police are currently overly engaged with security matters. Troops will reinforce police until at least Thursday, when authorities will review the national threat level, which is now set at 3 on a scale of 1 to 4. This follows Thursday's police raid in the eastern town of Verviers, where 2 Islamic gunmen were shot dead. They were reportedly part of a cell that had been preparing an attack on police. 10 people are dead, churches were burned, and homes looted in the African nation of Niger as a result of rioting by Islamic groups. Violence flared following solidarity demonstrations for victims of the Charlie Hebdo magazine attack. The violence focused in the capital Niamey and the town of Zinder. Islamists set churches and bars ablaze, and some 45 people were injured in the rioting. Niger is a former French colony, and they have been experiencing unrest due to worldwide protests over the satirical cartoons of the Prophet Muhammad that appeared in the French publication. 4 Muslim imams were arrested for encouraging the lawlessness. And down by the River Jordan today, thousands of Christian pilgrims from Eastern churches baptized themselves in Christianity's third holiest site on Epiphany. Coming from around the world, they lined the bluffs at the baptism site of Qasr El Yehud, the spot where John the Baptist baptized Jesus and began his ministry. The site is smack in the middle of the international border between Israel and Jordan, and pilgrims were also seen on the eastern side of the River Jordan, which was just 10 meters wide.
I'm coming from Ireland with my sisters to visit. We want to see where Jesus was baptized. It's very nice to be here today at the River Jordan. We brought my son along, Henry. He's just 3 months old.
For those who want to stay up to date with social apps, this next item is for you. This week, a new app called Cork was launched and aims to become the go-to platform people use to spread local news, promote events, and start conversations with those around them. Alexander Joen asked co-founder Ben Goldman to tell IBA a bit about the free new Cork app.
So Cork is a mobile application for iOS and Android, and it's spelled Q-O-R-K. And basically, we're about sharing interesting information happening in your local area with other nearby people. So one way to kind of think of it is that in the same way that you kind of have a Facebook friends feed where all your friends are posting content, on Cork it's other people in your area who are posting content. And that's really key to Cork, which is that it's connecting you with other local people in your area so you can share things that are happening.
Okay. All right. So how does Cork fit into the current sphere of social media?
Yeah. So Cork really occupies an interesting space in that, you know, one of the things we say is that in the way that Facebook connects you with your friends and Twitter connects you maybe with people with similar interests, Cork connects you with your local community. So that focus on local is really key to Cork. so that even gets to kind of the name of Cork, which is that we consider Cork to be a more granular form of social media, even in the same way that the atom was considered the smallest particle until the quark particle was discovered. We consider the Cork to be the smallest form of social media in existence.
Okay. All right, so tell me what makes it different from other apps. So I know you touched on this a little bit, but can you go into more detail?
Yeah, absolutely. So Cork really differentiates itself in two main ways. And the first is in location, obviously. So every piece of content that you post to Cork has an exact geo-coordinates, which means that it corresponds to an exact place in the real world. It can be your house, it can be where the story took place, whether if it's a news story, it could be where an event is happening, or it could be where you are, if you're reviewing a local business, for instance, or a restaurant, it could be where that business is. So location is the first way we differentiate ourselves, and then the second way is in time relevancy. So Cork is really about connecting you with what's happening in your local area right now. So Corks are more popular the moment they're created, and then as they receive more activity, they begin to trend in order to notify other people in your area that there's something interesting happening right now. So I think those are the two main ways that we differentiate ourselves, which is location and time relevancy.
Sure. All right, so how will Cork affect local communities?
Yeah, so we're really excited to have Cork kind of enter the local community space because we think that it could really have some interesting effects on the way people interact with their local community. We want people to be able to feel instantly connected to their local area just by opening Cork. So in the same way that when you wake up in the morning, you might check your favorite news sites to see what's happening in the world, we want people to open up Cork to see what's happening in their local area. And so we think that that kind of connectivity to what's happening around you could be really exciting.
Taking a look at the local finance, with no currency trading on Sundays, the shekel remains the same. While share prices on the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange started off trading week at a mixed performance. Here's a look at the afternoon numbers. But turning to the weather now, and the forecast is for partly cloudy skies tomorrow with a slight rise in temperatures, particularly in the hilly regions. Here's a look at the expected highs and lows at home and abroad for the next 24 hours. That's all for today. Aaron Viner will be back at this desk tomorrow to bring you the latest news from Israel. Please join him. Until then, I'm Aryeh O'Sullivan wishing you a great evening and shalom from Jerusalem.